Today we're going to be finishing our final project in this Texture Basics course. If you didn't make the brick material in the last tutorial, you can either watch that video, which you can find in the description, or you can download the project file we made last episode in the description below. With that though, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn off our subdivision surface modifiers temporarily. The reason I'm doing this is because it's going to be way too laggy for us to see the changes we're making for all this subdivision surface going on. So I'll first left click my brick wall, and I'm going to left click this option here that looks like a monitor. This is the option for display in viewport. So when I turn this off, you can see right away one of the subdivision surface modifiers has been removed. However, when we render our final image, it will still be displayed. We're going to turn these back on in a bit anyway, but for now I'm going to turn them off so we have a smoother blender. I'm going to do the same thing for the UV sphere. I'll left click it. I'll also turn off my displace for my brick wall as well. There we go. Now when I go into my render preview, things will now be a lot faster. For now, I'm going to go back into solid view. If you're wondering why there's a texture in here, this is because I have the texture mode enabled in solid view, so it's displaying our displacement texture. I'm going to turn that off and put it back to material. I'll press Shift A in my shader editor, and I'm going to add another principal BSDF shader. This one is going to be our Decay shader. Have a think about what shader we're going to need to use to combine these two together. Since we're going to be switching between the two, we're going to want to use a mix shader. So I'll press Shift A, then under shader, I'm going to left click mix shader. Then I'll plug it in between my principal BSDF for material output, and I'll plug my second shader in here. For the base color, I'm just going to make it grey for now. We're going to use a more detailed color option in a minute, but first I want to show you how exactly this mix shader is working. I'll left click this here to go into my material preview. Right now you can see that our brick texture is looking a little bit grey, and that's because we're right in the middle here with a mix shader. If I was to turn this all the way down to 0, you can see we've got the full effect of the brick texture, and if I turn this to 1, we've now got the full effect of our Decay shader, which for now is just a simple grey material. So I'm going to leave my factor at 1 just now, and I'm going to work on my Decay shader. So before we go in depth, we should probably organize things a bit more. So I'm going to left click and drag to select all of these nodes here. These are the nodes that make up the brick texture. Once I've got them all selected, I'll move them to the left and press Ctrl and then J. This will put them in a frame. I'm then going to left click this frame, left click the node in the toolbar, which you can open and close pressing N, and I'm going to change the label to brick shader. You can even add a color if you want by left clicking this checkbox and changing the color. Now I'm going to zoom back into my other shader. First thing we're going to want to do is sort out our base color. So I'll press Shift and then A. I'm going to search for input, and I'm going to add a texture coordinate. I'm going to use one of our built-in textures here. Then I'll press Shift A. Under texture, I'll left click noise texture. I'll plug in my object to the vector, and I'm going to plug in factor to base color. Now we've got this appearance here. I'm going to want to make our noise texture quite a bit bigger. So I'm going to set the scale from 5 to, let's say, 25. That's looking not too bad. I think I might set it to 40. There we go. You can also add some detail if you want, but keep in mind that detail does take a lot of cost of performance. So for now I'm just going to leave it. I'll press Shift and then A. Then under converter, I'll left click color ramp. I'm going to plug the color ramp between our shader and our noise texture. I'm first going to left click on the black slider, and I'm going to make it quite a bit brighter. About here should do. Then for our second one, the white one, I'm going to make this one a little bit darker. And there, that should do nicely for now. For the roughness, I'm going to set it to 0.7 for now, but I might change it later. Now we're going to use the bump node to add a little bit of a cracked effect. So I'll press Shift A, then under vector, I'll left click bump. Then I'll plug my normal into the normal, and I'm going to drag my texture coordinate down a little bit. Then I'll press Shift A, then under texture, I'm going to left click Voronoi texture. I'm going to change it from F1 to distance to edge. I'll plug my object into the vector, then distance into the height of my bump. So this is the crackle effect we'll get by default. You can see it's closer to what we're wanting, but the problem is the cracks are a little bit too pointy, whereas we want them to be a little bit more flat in the middle. So to fix this, we can press Shift A, then under converter, I'll left click color ramp. Then I'll plug this in between my Voronoi texture and my bump. You may experience quite a bit of loading times in the material preview. I find that using cycles in the render preview is usually quite a bit faster, but it does create quite a lot of noise, which can slow down my screen capture, which is why I am doing it in material preview. I'm then just going to bring the white slider closer to the black one, and now you can see the pointy bits of these crackles are starting to flatten out. I'm happy with that just now. Now let's take a look at what things are looking like in render preview. Alright, I'm pretty happy with how our crackles are looking so far. For now, I'm going to left click my brick wall and I'm going to turn on all these modifiers again. Alright, things have finished loading there. Now that we've finished our decay shader, we now need to figure out how we're going to switch between the two to create this transitioning effect between brick and decay. So the first thing I'm going to do, for the sake of improving speed, is I'm going to turn off all my modifiers again. So the first thing I've done here is just move this old displacement texture out of the way and delete it by pressing X, since that was something we used to bake in the last episode. Then I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to box select some of these nodes, pull them in a bit, pull the bump in a little bit. I accidentally checked the invert box, so just uncheck that. Then I'm going to drag and select all of these nodes and press Ctrl J. Then I'm going to change my label in the node panel. Remember, we press N to open this menu, and I'm going to call the label Decay Shader. Now I'm going to zoom in back into my mix shader, and I want you to have a think about which built-in Blender texture we can use in order to create a transition between the two. This will be acting as the mask, which is plugged into the factor. If you guessed the gradient texture, you would be correct. So I'll press Shift and then A, then under texture, I'm going to left click gradient texture. I'm going to plug my color into the surface, just so I can see what this is going to look like. I'll then go into my render preview. You can now see we've got a gradient at the end of our objects. I'm now going to press Shift A, then I'm going to come to input and left click texture coordinate object. Now you can see it's taken it to around halfway through our object. I'm going to left click color ramp. I'll plug my color ramp between my gradient texture and my material output. Now we're going to go ahead and make the gradient a little bit bigger. So to do that, I'm going to change from linear to ease in my color ramp, and we can even change our gradient texture to easing as well. Now I'm going to press Shift A, then I'm going to search for mapping. I'll left click the mapping node and I'm going to plug it in between my texture coordinate and gradient texture. Now I've done that, I'm going to plug this gradient texture into my factor, and it's going to start from black, which will represent our first shader, which is the brick shader, and it will transition into white, which will represent our second shader, which is our decay shader. But how do we get this transition to work? Well, to do that, we're going to need to make a quick animation. So I'll go back into my material preview and I'm going to change my UV editor to the timeline. I'm going to make this animation around 6 seconds long. So I'm going to go all the way to frame 1 and I'm going to set my X location to -2, which will completely show our brick shader, and I'll press I, and that's going to add the keyframe at this frame. Then I'm going to go along to frame 180 and I'm going to set the X location to 3 and I'll press I again. And now you can see if I play the animation, is transitioning between the two. Now for some of you, you might want to use a bump node instead of displacement, so I'm going to quickly show you how we can set that up. First thing I'll do is press Shift A, left click search and search for bump. Oh, I forgot to mention, the reason why I've set the end of the animation to 180 frames is because I'm using 30 frames per second. So just left click your output properties and set it to 30 frames per second in the frame rate. If you want to learn how to render out this animation when we finish it, you can check out this video in the top right hand corner just now. Then I'm going to plug my bump in between the bump and the brick shader. I'm going to go back into solid view just to see what I'm doing. Then I'm going to plug my factor into the height and left click invert, since by default the brick mask will be the wrong way around and it will make the indentations pop out, whereas we want the bricks themselves to be popping out, so we'll turn on that invert. Then I'm going to left click my bump node, shift left click my brick, press Ctrl C, Ctrl V to paste. Then I'm going to drag this along into my decay shader. I'll then take this bump and plug it in between the two of these nodes here. So I'll plug the normal of my other bump into here and the second normal into the normal. Then when I go into my render preview, although it's not as strong, you can see we've got a brick bump effect. This can be an alternative to using the displacement, but the displacement will look a lot better. If we want to simply turn this off, then we can just set our strength here to 0 and we can set the strength to 0 on the other one. And yeah, you don't need to worry about these bump nodes affecting the previous ones, because the previous bump nodes are being stored in the normal channel, which won't be affected by any of these parameters above normal. Now I've done that, I'm just going to left click my brick wall, left click my spanner icon, and I'm going to turn on all my modifiers again. But I'm going to do this in solid view just to speed up time. Now I've left clicked all those monitor icons, which is the icon for turn on in the 3D viewport. We can go ahead and see what our final result will look like. And there we have it. That's our transition between those two shaders working nicely. You'll notice it is a little bit different from the animation that I've made, and that's because I've done mine in a different file and I made this one from scratch. So if you want it to look more like mine, you can just go ahead and tweak the brick colors a little bit. With that though, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. In the next video, the final part of the course, we're going to cover how we can save some of our custom made shaders like the brick shader and the decay shader into nodes which we can access in any Blender menu. With that though, I want to congratulate you for completing the final project of this course, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.